Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the November 29th, 2022 joint public hearing of the Calvert County Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. We will begin this meeting with item 1 on the proposed agenda, roll call. Vice Chair Kernan.
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
He was on the Zoom call earlier. We are having technical difficulties bringing him back.
Okay, we'll give him a minute. Commissioner Freeland.
Here.
Commissioner Toohey.
Here.
Commissioner Dr. Holler.
Here.
Commissioner Williams. Here. All right, if you could all please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just for the record, Madam Chair, Commissioner Jones is with us on Zoom.
Okay. Mr. Jones, can you hear us?
I can, thank you, ma'am.
All right, great. Now I'll turn the floor over to you, John Norris, to go over the rules of etiquette.
Thank you. The Board of County Commissioners has adopted a resolution in 1989 in order to maintain the order and decorum of the governmental process. Those attending in person will be invited to speak. There are sign-up sheets at the back. There are 3 public hearings scheduled for this evening. All were duly advertised, and the certificate of publication is made part of the record of each of the hearings. Citizens were invited to provide comment on any or all of the hearings, and they will be invited again after the presentation of each has concluded. Each of the 3 hearings have a separate comment period followed by a brief presentation. A person must sign into the sheet at the table in the back of the room if you wish to provide comment. Those joining us virtually will be asked to raise their hand or press star 9 to raise their hand. Participants must identify themselves and whether speaking as an individual, where they be allocated 2 minutes, or as the designated representative of a group, where they will be given 5 minutes.
Right. Our first item up is 3A, Department of Planning and Zoning, Text Amendment Case TA 22-03, amendments to the Calvert County zoning ordinance to allow for possible cemetery uses.
Good evening. I'm Rachel O'Shea, zoning planner with Department of Planning and Zoning, and I will be taking you through the presentation this evening. The purpose of tonight's joint public hearing is to review and discuss the proposed text amendment 22-03 to allow for possible cemetery accessory uses, and then to receive and consider public comment and to close the record and take action on the proposed text amendment. Background. Planning and Zoning staff received a text amendment application from the Chesapeake Memorial Gardens requesting that crematoriums and funeral homes be permitted as accessory uses to existing cemeteries. The applicant reasons that funeral homes and crematoriums are related uses to cemeteries and are businesses that are low intensity and have minimal impact to the surrounding properties. We'll also note that prior to the zoning ordinance update in 2006, crematoriums and funeral homes were permitted by special exception in the district of what is now known as the Farm and Forest District. This is a map of the location of the Chesapeake Highlands Memorial Gardens. It's about a half mile down off of Brooms Island Road from Route 4. This shows the current existing use charts. You'll see for crematorium and funeral home, there's nothing in those blocks for, so it's not permitted within the FFD, the Farm and Forest District. But if you go down to the second chart, a cemetery or memorial garden is permitted within the FFD. So then going and showing the proposed text amendment in red is to add an SC for special exception for crematorium and funeral home under the Farm and Forest District, with the conditions that the crematorium shall be accessory to a funeral home and that the funeral home shall be accessory to an existing public cemetery as of the adoption of this ordinance. Agency comments received include comments from the Office of the County Attorney recommending a definition be added to the text amendment to distinguish private from versus public cemeteries. So we did add a proposed definition as part of the text amendment proposal. which states for public cemetery. A public cemetery is one used by the general community, a neighborhood, or a church, while private cemetery is one used only by a family or small portion of the community, and that the actual public use rather than the ownership determines whether a cemetery is public. The next steps include discussion and or questions, followed by public comment. Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners closes the record and takes action on the proposed text amendment.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments? Hearing none. Do we have anybody signed up from the public? Okay, anybody on Zoom?
No one has signed up virtually. No, ma'am.
At this time, I'll ask for a motion to close the record and make a recommendation regarding the proposed text amendment 22-03.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we close the public record, that we find this consistent with the comprehensive plan, and that we recommend it be passed by the Board of County Commissioners.
I have a motion by Commissioner Tui. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kernan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Turn it over to you, Commissioner Hale. Oh, Commissioner Weems.
No, thank you, Madam Chairman. I am Vice President Steve Weems. To my left, Commissioner Mike Hart, Commissioner Gadway, and Commissioner Hance has recused himself on this topic. Does the Board of County Commissioners have any questions for staff? None? I entertain a motion.
Mr. Vice President, I move that we close the record and approve and adopt the ordinance enacting changes to the Calvert County zoning ordinance as submitted in case TA 22-03.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor. We have a second. Any further discussion? None being heard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 3-0. I turn it back over to you, madam.
All right, next up. Wait for him to come back in. Next up, we have item 3B, text amendment case 22-04, amendment to the Calvert County zoning ordinance to allow for cigar lounges in the Lesby Town Center.
Good evening again. I'm Rachel O'Shea, zoning planner with Department of Planning and Zoning, and I will take you through the presentation this evening for text amendment 22-04. The purpose of tonight's joint public hearing is to review and discuss the proposed text amendment 22-04 to allow for cigar lounges within the neighborhood commercial sub-district of the Lesby Town Center, to receive and consider public comment and take action on the proposed text amendment. Background. Plan and zoning staff received a text amendment application from Mr. Lincoln Lawrence requesting that the use of a cigar lounge be added to the Lesby Town Center use chart as a separate use and be permitted within the town center. The applicant states that within the town center and within proximity to the proposed location of his cigar lounge is a liquor store and a restaurant or bar. The applicant stated that the current ordinance does not lend to this type of business model that is growing throughout the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia area, and that this proposed change will allow for growth of these types of businesses within the Lesby area of Calvert County. Currently, this use is already permitted within other sub-districts of the Lesby Town Center, including the Village Commercial as well as the Village Edge sub-district. This slide shows a map of the proposed location for the cigar lounge. It is located within a strip mall center off of Town Square Drive behind the post office. And this next map gives you a reference of the location of the different sub-districts of the Lesby Town Center. You can see that the neighborhood commercial is split into 3 pieces kind of surrounding the Village Commercial with the Village Edge district to the south. This slide shows the existing Lesby Town Center use chart. You can see toward the bottom is use 22, tavern, nightclub, lounge, and dance hall. And this is the proposed change, adding a P for permitted under the neighborhood commercial subdistrict for that use of 22 Tavern Nightclub Lounge and Dance Hall. Agency comments received include the Calvert Health Department, Division of Environmental Health. The Calvert County Health Department, in cooperation with the Maryland Department of Health, enforces the Clean Air Act, the CIAA. The CIAA prohibits smoking in indoor areas open to the public with the following exceptions. One being a retail tobacco business that is a sole proprietorship, limited liability company, corporation, partnership, or other enterprise in which, one, the primary activity is the retail sale of tobacco products and accessories, and two, the sale of other products being incidental. I will note that the commissioners the Board of County Commissioners requested that staff also take a look at the other town centers to see if it was needed to expand this use into the other town centers as well. We did take a look at that. There is already a level of permittability in the other town centers, and it was not needed to expand the proposed text amendment. So with that, I'll go over next steps to include any discussion and or questions, followed by public comment. Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners will close the record and take action on the proposed amendment.
Commissioners? Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to speak?
Yes. First speaker is Craig Goff.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Craig Goff, 7935 Hampton Way of Owings, Maryland. 26 years ago, I came to this county, and there's no better county in Maryland as far as I'm concerned. I raised my 3 boys here. My wife and I live in the county, but it seems the past 26 years, I had to go to the 4 surrounding counties if I wanted to go and do a little adult recreation of smoking a cigar. And it's so disturbing to me that I have to go to Charles County, St. Mary's County, wherever, just to have a cigar and get away and decompress from my job, because I have a pretty stressful job. Hopefully we can make this work. I know I like to stay in the county at all times if possible. That's what I'm here for, and as a lot of you guys know, Calvert County was built on the tobacco product back in the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Don Padier.
Hello, Don Poudre, 1621 Mission Street, Owens, Maryland. Been here since 1977. Enjoy Calvert County. Want to keep Calvert as country as possible. But there's times when, you know, I want to support the small entrepreneurship companies, and this is what this would be. And as Mr. Goff was stipulated, it'd be good not to have to even go to Virginia, Alexandria, and those areas, and just to stay here in the county to participate in this type of environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Rob Randall.
Hello, happy birthday, Mike, Todd. You guys know me, Lusby. I've been there 30 years. My address is 2740 Hatteras Lane in Lusby. I'm here to back Mr. C's Cigar Lounge because I feel it's a good idea for us folks that are up in the age that like a cigar and like to go in and relax. And there's a lot of empty spaces out there in Lusby, as you know, and it could be good for taxes purposes for you guys, for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last speaker is Joseph Kamir.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Joseph Cormier, 9201 Sam Owings Place in Owings, Maryland. I've spoken on this many times. I understand that Calvert has a long history with tobacco, but we spent a lot of money paying tobacco farmers to stop growing tobacco because we know the harms of tobacco. We spend so much time and money in the schools trying to get kids to not start tobacco, and we spend so much money in the health department and local hospitals trying to help adults cessate from tobacco. I don't understand why we would open the door on this policy to bring back indoor smoking. We as a country made that choice decades ago to not allow indoor smoking. It doesn't make sense because someone put $500 in the pot to open up for an amendment. we should really be going back to remove the ability to have indoor smoking in any of our townships. It just doesn't make sense, and there are plenty of ways to recreate in Calvert County that don't involve chewing on a tobacco stick. And as a registered veteran of the burn pits, as an Iraq veteran, I can't imagine somebody does this as recreation. So thank you so much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
I have no more speakers.
Is there
Madam,
any-
there are two speakers, or there are two persons on the virtual call. So if either of the two participants virtually would like to speak, please raise your hand using the raise your hand function under the More button. And neither has raised their hand.
All right. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to close the record and make a recommendation regarding text amendment 22-04 to allow cigar lounges in the Lusby Town Center.
Madam Chairman, I would like to make a recommendation that we close the public record and decline to recommend this motion.
I have a motion by Commissioner Tui. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Kernan. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed. Roll call. Roll call.
I need to do a roll call for this one, please. Vice Chair Kernan?
Opposed. No.
Commissioner Jones?
I am not opposed, I am opposed to the motion.
So, okay, so he's a no. You're opposed. Commissioner Freeland?
Opposed.
Commissioner Tui?
I'm for the motion.
Commissioner Dr. Holler?
Opposed.
Commissioner Williams? Opposed. Okay. So the opposed have it. Do we want to do another motion?
Not I. Perhaps someone else would.
You can forward our motion on to the
Just-
Board of County Commissioners and have them deal with it.
All right, Commissioner Hance?
So, Commissioners, you've heard the discussion and the debate and the, any questions, discussion?
Are we able to move
Motions?
forward with the motion to approve?
You are.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I'm not sure the Planning Commission has finalized their
I was
recommendation.
asking for, if we had another motion.
Sound like they didn't want to do that.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
motion to close the record and forward, find this text amendment consistent with the comprehensive plan and forward to the Board of County Commissioners.
Right, I have a motion by Commissioner Freeland,
Second.
a second by Commissioner Jones. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Roll call again? Okay. Vice Chair Kernan?
Opposed.
Commissioner Jones?
But I am in favor of the motion to approve this.
Commissioner Freeland?
In favor.
Commissioner Tui?
Opposed.
Commissioner Dr. Holler?
Opposed.
Commissioner Williams? Okay, the opposed have it again. Mr. Mattingly?
4-2.
4-2. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the Planning Commission has no recommendation for the Board of County Commissioners.
That's what I'm deducing. And before I get too far along, I need, Madam Clerk, you need to make sure the record shows that Commissioner Hart has recused himself from this discussion.
Yes, sir.
So I'm back to where I started. You gentlemen have heard the discussion of the Planning Commission. They have no recommendation for us for an action on this issue. Do you have any questions or?
I'd like to make a comment
Sure,
and then a motion.
sure.
I, as a veteran, also feel that we have a free country and that if someone chooses not to participate in a particular activity, then they're welcome not to participate in it. but I'm not gonna be here to stifle small business or growth or an adult's right to choose what they care to do, as long as it's consistent with the law. And in the 1920s or 30s, there was a prohibition against alcohol. That was overturned after a few years. I'm not here to stifle someone's use of tobacco products, especially when there's a nationwide movement to approve the use of other smoking products that don't seem to have the objections. So with that said, I would like to move that we close the record and approve and adopt the ordinance enacting changes to the Calvert County zoning ordinance as submitted in case TA 22-04.
Second.
Have a motion and a second that we close the record and approve and adopt the ordinance enacting changes to the Calvert County zoning ordinance as submitted in case TA 22-04. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Next up, we have item 3C, proposed Chapter 3 of the Calvert County Code, adequate public facilities requirements.
Good evening. I'm Mary Beth Cook, Director of Planning and Zoning, and with me this evening will be several representatives from various other county departments. With me at the podium right now is Carrie Dahl, Director of Public Works. So we're here this evening to present the proposed adequate public facilities requirements. Currently, the adequate public facilities are found in Article 7 of the Calvert County zoning ordinance, and on the screen is some language from that section. The adequate public facilities regulations were adopted in 1988 and were originally contained in the subdivision regulations from 1988 till 2002, where they were then adopted in the Calvert County zoning ordinance from 2003 to the present. The amendments for adequate public facilities for schools were done in, amendments were done in 2003, 2008, and 2018. There have also been minor edits done for the road adequate public facilities. Currently, for schools, the adequate public facilities only apply to residential development, and that will continue. However, the other various regulations for adequate public facilities that will be presented tonight will not only include non-residential development, but non-residential development such as commercial, industrial, and institutional. The 2019 Comprehensive Plan had an action to expand adequate public facilities regulations to include sewer, water, storm drain, solid waste, public safety, and law enforcement services. So we're here tonight to review and discuss these proposed changes to the adequate public facilities. The existing regulations for schools and roads will be removed from the zoning ordinance through Text Amendment 22-05 and will be adopted as a new chapter, Chapter 3 of the County Code. Any new regulations will become part of the development review process. So if any one of the existing or proposed categories is found to be inadequate during development review, the development will not be able to start construction until capacity becomes adequate. The adequate public facilities for schools currently are shown on the slide, cannot exceed 100% capacity, and the Department of Planning and Zoning staff works with the county Board of Education, school district staff every year, twice a year, to issue a adequate public facilities report for school, and we just recently presented that to the Planning Commission in November. We will continue to do that and continue to propose that any school that exceeds 100% will not be able to record a major subdivision. This excludes minor subdivisions. Currently, we propose to keep that the same. and they will not be able to record for 6 years unless the capacity becomes adequate during those years. So really, we're proposing no change to the adequate public facilities for schools, except to take it out of the zoning ordinance and put it in the new Chapter 3 of the county code. I'm gonna now turn it over to Carrie.
Good evening, everyone. Kerry Dahl, Director of Public Works. So when I go through here, there were some modifications that I picked up today during a work session that I had with the commissioners, and I'll cover those as I go across those. First one up is actually here with the adequate public facilities for roads. As currently stated, you know, we're maintaining a level of service C for every road except for the ones where the town service, where D is considered to be acceptable. That's going to be removed. If I had to just cover this and make this simple, the proposed, starting at each and ending at high capacity method, is the only thing that's actually going to stay in there now. Everything after each is going to be eliminated. Okay, so essentially what that means is at section 3-6, we're going to basically require that each lane and lane approach of roadways in the impact area must operate at or above the minimum level of service of C using the highway capacity method. And that's the only thing that's actually going to stick from this point forward. We understand that most of the roads that actually navigate through Calvert County, that there are a lot of state roads, and most of those places in the town centers are actually at those intersections where those state roads cross into the county roads. So it'll take a collaborative effort from this point forward to actually make that work and to achieve that level of service C, to make that work. Moving along, we are still going to go ahead and maintain the impact studies. We're going to go ahead and reduce the number of movements from 400 to 250 to basically trigger more basically traffic studies so we can actually assess that. That last statement, inadequacy, no longer applies because we're not going to accept E or F. For public sewer, this is another one along with the public water that is going to change. Currently listed in the ordinance, it actually has 80%, but we're going to have 90%. I will let you know that we are basically enumerating this so we have a hard line. 90% is a capacity. We have automatic thresholds that are set by the Department of Environment that it causes us to go into a redesign phase for infrastructure for our wastewater treatment plants if they record 3 years in a row of 80% or higher. So if we record flows for sewer at 80% or higher, then we're required to actually go into a redesign process and actually build the capacity for that infrastructure. We are currently doing that, obviously, for the Prince Frederick area, but I will say that we're well below the 80% threshold at this point, and we're moving forward with the plan to actually modify that infrastructure. So at this one here, along with the public water one, I will say that at section 3-14A1 and section 3-15A, change 80% to 90% for both of those. And those are, again, those are hard lines that will be considered to be inadequate if we get to that point of 90% without any infrastructure modifications. The adequate public facility for storm water and drainage. Again, to simplify this as much as possible, without, when you basically start with trees, grass, and natural habitat, and you go to develop it, and you put pavement down, and you put impervious area in the area, what you're going to do then is essentially maintain what you had previously. Otherwise, the flow coming off of that site will be at the same level that it would be and treated as if it was grass, trees, so on and so forth. There was a question in reference to this when it comes down to what data we're using to use that. Right now, we're currently using NOAA's Atlas 14 as the standard. Commissioner Hance caught me on this one today when he said that's for 2014. It is not. It's actually for 2006. Currently, Atlas 15 is in staffing at this time. In fact, they were actually taking comments up and through November 15th of this month to actually move forward with the staffing of that document. I also was reminded by one of my staff members that we currently have received a grant to basically work with the University of Maryland to work specifically on Calvert County in the sum of $75,000 to basically study the rainfall in Calvert County itself. And that data, after that work with the University of Maryland, will be available probably in about a year's time, and we'll use that when we start factoring in the rainfalls and everything like that when we start using these calculations. So we are doing a little bit more than what is actually, we'll say, the current standard. And I will remind you that the state is only now using TP40, but they are coming off that and actually moving. TP40 is based on a 1955 standard. So I'm not, so we are using a higher standard essentially than what the state is using. Solid waste, this is all based about the transfer station at Appeal. Currently, anything considered to be 70% or below of the capacity of the transfer station is where we would like to be as far as that goes. And if that happens to be where we have to make a infrastructure modification, we will. And we are currently planning improving that infrastructure to where we won't have to worry about it exceeding that 70% level. We're not to the point where even that's a consideration at this point. We are working at a just a fine capacity at this point. Based on what I've provided you here thus far, that's all I have, depending on your questions from me.
Kerr, what's the current percentage usage of the appeal site?
I believe it's just close to 60%.
60%?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Thank you.
Director Dahl, in regard to the stormwater, is there some language proposed that will allow you to use the most up-to-date data as it comes along?
I don't currently have that in the APF ordinance, but we will use the standard that we are we will use the most current standard that essentially that is provided to us. And right now we're looking at transferring to NOAA 15 when it comes out, NOAA's Atlas 15 when it comes out.
So as time progresses and there's another NOAA standard,
if it goes to Atlas 16, yes.
You will move to that?
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Yes, sir.
Question, two of them really. Reading that, does that mean then that if I'm a commercial developer of a property in Dunkirk, since it does not use a public sewer, that part of that does not relate to me in my development, since they have private sewers?
It would be dependent on that public sewer's capacity to handle that development.
Well, there is no public sewer. They have a private one.
Well, sorry, wrong language. Private sewer. It basically depends on whether that private sewer has the ability to handle that capacity.
You should say that, I would think, respectfully in this. You say public. That's what raised the question in my mind.
True, sir. We do not have any affiliation with those private entities that actually run those private systems. We only work with the customers that are currently on our enterprise fund, which is roughly about 5,400 customers.
Oh, I understand. I'm just asking it from the standpoint of an applicant, whether this applies to them. And what you're saying is, even though you're saying it applies to public, you're saying that if this private sewer does not conform and does not have the same arrangement as the public, it's still no good.
I would believe that to be the case, yes, sir.
All right. I think your language doesn't say that, respectfully. The second question I have regarding transfer, the transfer station. Are you still taking out-of-county trash?
We are.
You are. Has that been put into your calculation as to the impact of the amount of out-of-county trash that comes here and goes through the transfer station?
We do.
And that is folded into all of the 70% and all that business?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
How much of the current capacity that we're doing comes from out of county?
I don't have the exact numbers. I would have to look that up for you to tell you the truth.
And does that generate revenue for us?
Sure.
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And just for our folks up here, there was some new information that earlier today, that you discussed with Prince Frederick Sewer capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have that, and I'm prepared to provide that to the commissioners and you if you'd like to see it, but I actually have a copy of it with me, but I'm not going to go into that tonight if you don't mind.
Commissioners, any other questions, comments?
Okay, if you have no further questions for Carrie, we're going to move on to public safety.
Thank you.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Commissioner Jones?
Yeah, I have two questions. The first question is for Ms. Cook, Director Cook. The first one is, I heard today, and maybe I misunderstood it, I'm just trying to put some context to it, was that our schools are under capacity except for one school. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. One elementary school.
Okay, and why is that one school over capacity?
Because of transfer students. And without those transfer students being allowed by the Board of Education, it would not be over capacity.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And the second one is for Mr. Dole. I'm just trying to put some context, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know you just explained. I don't know if you don't want to go into it. But several months ago, we heard that the sewer system was at 70 to 80% capacity in Prince Frederick. Today, we heard it was at roughly 60% capacity at the commissioners' meeting. Did I hear that correctly?
The number of the amount of capacity that was being used when I briefed you earlier in the year was roughly 68.1%, if I recall, and showed you a chart and a trend line on how that was working. Currently, and we went back and done the analysis on this. Today, I've actually just pulled fresh numbers after my meeting with the commissioners this morning, and year-to-date capacity flow data on the Prince Frederick sewer system is 61% total. And what we believe, and it's backed up by the amount of water that is actually being used by those same customers, that it has to do with the fact that people are not at home as much due to, we'll say, coming out of the pandemic. They're actually going back to work, they're not at home using those systems, and the flows have actually gone down along with the water usage because they're no longer exercising the system, they're going back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Dole. And the other part to that question is that at one point we talked about having to change infrastructure. At what percentage? What did we
That
initially
the infrastructure automatically hits a threshold for MDE that we must be into a design at 80%. So if I have 3 years of flow that measure above 80%, then we are required to modify the infrastructure.
And are we did I hear tonight, are we talking about changing that or no?
That does not change. That is a requirement from the Maryland Department of Environment.
Yes, sir. Okay. So what I'm hearing from you then, this is a lot less than we initially thought as of today, correct?
Yes, sir. I think yes, correct. It is less than what I briefed you earlier in the year. And I believe that's because it captured the data when people were actually staying home and using the system more than what they had previously used in years past.
And that would be approximately 10% less, correct?
It was 68.1 then, it is now 61. So it's probably about 7% less, sir.
Okay, Mr. Dole, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jim Richardson, Division Chief for Fire Rescue EMS, Department of Public Safety. When asked to develop a objective finding for adequate public facilities for fire and EMS services, with our primary goal being the provision of quality service to the citizens in a timely manner, we elected to go with response times. The adequacy of the fire and EMS service would be measured with response time statistics, which measures the time between when a resource would be dispatched from our emergency communications center to their actual arrival on the scene. Typically, response time is a direct relation to, obviously, the distance from a fire and EMS station. They also can be affected by a variety of other sources, the availability of resources, particularly in times of EMS service demand is excessive, or we have significant wait times to transfer patients to the hospitals when we're talking about EMS. The service would be considered adequate if the following standards were met. Okay. Each fire and EMS company's response areas are sectioned into sub-areas known as what we call box areas. These box areas are in direct relation to the distance of emergency response travel from that particular station to the particular areas in that department's first due area. We have 6 major service areas divided into the 92 boxes. There's anywhere from 10 to 26, I believe, for one department, boxes in any of those 6 service areas. The criteria would be applied to development of commercial, institutional, industrial, and major subdivisions. There could also be additional considerations if a development were to provide EMS service, example of a senior or a skilled nursing facility. When we talk about emergency medical services and addressing that, EMS response time to that first due area would be divided into 2 subsets. The first would be basic life support with an automatic external defibrillator would be within 10-minute response time measured on at least 90% incidents dispatched measured annually. The second tier would be of EMS response with an advanced life support or paramedic support unit measured again in a 10-minute response time, 90% of the time of the incidents as measured annually. Meeting of the 90% threshold comes from working with our GIS partners in technology services, mapping each of the fire department's first due areas. All are just about within 10 minutes, mostly less than 10 minutes of the given a factor traveling the posted speed limit plus 10 miles per hour. Noting that the majority of the higher density population and higher density and call volumes are closest to the existing stations currently. The proposed criteria for fire would be very similar with that 10-minute response time, but it would be the initial company arrival. In addition to the fire department response, we have fire flow and duration. These are currently in place within the county's Fire Prevention Code, Chapter 44, where sufficient flow and duration of flow must be available for water supply for particular types of development. And if you have any questions.
Commissioners? Hearing none?
Thank you, Jen.
Next, we have 911 Center.
Good evening, Commissioners. Stanley Harris, Division Chief, Emergency Communications. So for the 911 Center, we're considering the staffing within the 911 Center to be considered adequate by using the National Emergency Numbers Association staffing model. So we're recommending the text read that the approved full-time equivalents assigned to take 911 calls and emergency dispatch responders meets or exceeds the FTEs recommended by the National Emergency Number Association or NENA's staffing tool as amended from time to time. And we're recommending that we incorporate a COMAR law into our ordinance. That's the county has sufficient number of call takers and equipment to consistently answer incoming calls on a daily average of 10 seconds or less. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
And the last category is law enforcement. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from the Sheriff's Office joining us tonight, so I'm going to read the slide and provide some additional information. So after the review of current residential development applications and county census data, the Calvert County Sheriff's Office law enforcement services are deemed adequate if the projected ratio of sworn law enforcement officers to population is 1.5 deputies per 1,000 residents. At this time, there is no identified commercial growth data to assist with this recommendation. As Calvert County government continues to receive residential or commercial development applications, data used to determine whether the above law enforcement ratio to population can only be gathered upon completion of the projects and occupancy. The growth generated by any proposed residential subdivision or commercial business may not exceed the service capacity of existing law enforcement officers. So using 1.5 deputies per 1,000 residents would necessitate 138 sworn deputies, and they currently have 168 sworn deputies, which equates to 1.82 deputies per 1,000 residents. So they're currently very adequate. So at this time, if you have any additional questions on any of the regulations, or we could start public comment.
I have a question that it isn't the regulations per se, but for instance, for the applicant, since as I understand this, and I've read it a number of times, the applicant is going to appear before the Director of Planning and Zoning and the appropriate other director, whether it be solid waste or what have you. My question, and maybe it's more for the lawyer than for you, my question is, what appeal rights does the applicant have, if any? And if so, how do they exercise that right?
That's a really good question. And just to clarify, so each department which is responsible for their section of the adequate public facilities is going to make recommendation to planning and zoning. We're kind of the clearinghouse for subdivisions, site plans, permits. So we're going to take the recommendation that comes from, we're not going to change that recommendation. But as far as appeal rights, I'm looking to my attorneys.
Well, as currently proposed, it would take it out of the zoning ordinance and put it right into the code. So, as with anything, dealing with the code, unless it has a built-in appellate mechanism, you go to the circuit court with it.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it's not so much an appeal, I would imagine, a declaratory judgment to use the first action to take. However, if it's considered too burdensome or onerous, we could be looking at an inverse condemnation case in circuit court.
What really triggered that in my thinking as I was reading this over and over again, a number of these things, and I don't say that critically, I understand it, a number of these things, standards, are going to change from time to time, either through actions of the county commissioners, that's easily understood, but also by non-county agencies that determine what is the appropriate number of sworn officers and things of that sort. And I'm thinking, well, if that's the case, I hope not, but I suspect sooner or later, somebody, an applicant, is going to challenge, well, is this the right current number, or is this not? And if that's so, then what's the procedure? And so what you're telling me is if that arises, then we go to circuit court.
Generally, in that exact scenario, would they generally file with the declaratory judgment action to challenge an interpretation of the statute, ordinance, or other regulation?
Mm-hmm.
And we see them from time to time in numerous different contexts in county government. So by taking it out of the zoning ordinance and putting it into the code, that's the mechanism that we would expect to see a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? And just for the record, we've received all written testimony. Do we have anybody signed up from the audience?
We do. First is Bob Estes, followed by Len Souza.
Good evening. My name is Bob Estes. I guess I gotta get down here a little. It's harder than it used to be. I'm representing Friends of Hunting Creek tonight, and I'm a resident of the Prince Frederick zip code. So the current comp plan spoke of expanding adequate public facilities beyond just schools and roads. And tonight I'd like to start by speaking about the APF for stormwater and drainage. And I'll cover a few other things if I have time. So as an engineer, I was tasked to design portions of spacecraft in my area of expertise. I needed to design to a set of criteria that would satisfy the rigors of what the spacecraft would encounter when performing its mission. Where I wasn't sure of the data available for the design, I would err on the side of a bit of over-design or margin. I and my fellow engineers would never, ever use data that we knew would compromise the success of a mission we would either apply margin or seek better data or even produce new data by performing our own tests. For stormwater management facilities, this means designing such that harm to the environment from erosion, sediment, or excess direct flow is avoided, even for rainfall events, which may happen only over certain given periods, such as 2 years, 10 years, 25 years, or even 100. Each higher span means designing for a higher rainfall amount and usually results in higher upfront costs, but can pay for itself with fewer or no failures and lower repair and maintenance costs. The chance of storms causing environmental damage also goes down with the higher design time spans. The cost of damaging the environment can be difficult to calculate, but the cost of correcting some of the obvious damage, such as removing sediment and restoring aquatic vegetation, can be very expensive. Our public works allows stormwater management facilities to be designed to criteria that is known to be too low for Calvert County, and they have for some time. Local data is available from NOAA for our county, but Public Works refuses to err on the side of caution currently, and they are not cautious, and they do not use the available local data, which goes back at least 16 years, to design robust systems. While many of the buildings will be around for decades, maybe even 50 years, maybe even longer, there's no accounting for the future effects of climate change either. I just don't understand how one could justify under-designing a system that have high probability of failing well before their expected lifetime is reached. Worse yet, there are precious few funds available to fix failed or failing systems, and these funds are from the citizens, not from the developer. Many of you have seen or know of some of the failures in Prince Frederick from tours and pictures that I've provided you in the past, and maybe you've seen them yourselves. What you haven't seen are sufficient funds to fix or rework some of the failed installations. It just doesn't show up in the budget very often, and it does from time to time, but it's not adequate to fix things. Calvert should be designed to a higher standard, which I believe over the life of the system will save money. Then again, if building a more robust system up front is too expensive, then perhaps that development shouldn't be built at all. Cost should not be the driving factor here. It's protecting the environment, as spoken often in the comp plan, and we all know that. If Calvert truly wants to protect our fragile peninsula and the waterways that surround us, we should design stormwater systems that reflect that desire, as if it was our own property we were protecting, and it is, isn't it? From the comp plan to the new ordinance to lower level documents, positive change is possible, but only if we insist on it. I've added a little something here. We're not sure when that Atlas 15 data is available. We don't know if it'll better represent what happens in Calvert County. There's no written procedure for updating. We didn't really get an answer to that. There's no written procedure for, yes, we will update to the latest available and best data that we have, period. It's not there. They say they'll put it in there, but that's one person saying it. It's not in the code. It's not anywhere to be found. Okay. And like I said, one of the things that everybody knows irks me to no extent, the new CAB there in Prince Frederick, it's going to be around probably longer than most of us. It's being designed to the old standards, not the new standards, and we can go over and above the minimum standard, but we refuse to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Len Souza, followed by Sue DeZurich.
Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to address you. I'm Leonard Souza, live in Solomons, and I'm speaking on behalf of Calvert Citizens United. Yesterday, I submitted a written statement to the Department of Planning and Zoning that supported the proposed changes to the county's APF. But after further research, I've changed my mind and now have serious reservations about them. There are several reasons for this change. Number one,
Key terms and provisions in the APF are vague and misleading. The provisions refer to a mitigation process in virtually all key provisions designed to protect county residents. According to Webster, the word mitigation means make something less rigorous. It's clear from the follow-on language in the document what the drafters really mean. They actually intend what they intend to do, and it's defined as a remedy. They actually intend to do remediation, and that is defined as providing a remedy or solving a problem. In this case, the problem is harm to or damage to infrastructure. The use of the word mitigation disguises the fact that this formulation is creating a mechanism in which Calvert officials will modify a proposed project that can harm the health, wealth, safety, or welfare of Calvert residents, instead of requiring developers to comply fully with APF and professional standards. The second area of vague language that I have a problem with is that when provisions refer to, quote, proposed projects, end quote, they really mean builders and developers. It makes no sense to say that, quote, a proposal shall be given an opportunity to provide infrastructure funds and so forth. I'm speaking for Calvert Citizens United. Because a proposal, well, let me start all over here. It makes no sense to say that a proposal shall be given an opportunity, and this is the language in the bill, or in the APF, given an opportunity to provide infrastructure funds. Because a proposal is a dumb piece of paper or a map, and it can't provide anything. What this really means is the use of the phrase proposed projects hides the fact that the suggested APF provisions enable builders and developers to make token contributions of funds or facilities to reduce their remediation costs. The use of the word mitigation is a subtle way to quietly shift expenditures for remediation from builders to Calvert taxpayers. The second problem I have, as currently drafted, the APF provisions collectively signal that developers need not necessarily comply with regulations relating to the protection of Calvert infrastructure because these regulations are open to negotiation. Third point, the proposed APF provisions either eliminate or significantly soften performance of the benchmarks for builders that are present in traditional APF provisions. The proposal to use a 90% factor for evaluating threats to public sewage and water supply is weaker than the 80% factor in a traditional APF. Another example of the weakening of APF criteria is that proposed measurements of traffic congestion significantly understate the impact of additional vehicles on local traffic. I understand this was addressed this morning at a commission meeting. I was not aware of those details, but I'm looking at what was done in the past. Fourth, instead of requiring contractors to absorb the cost of remediating problems caused by their proposed projects and to comply with traditional APF standards, this proposal effectively allows developers to negotiate how much they are willing to pay, thus shifting more costs to Calvert taxpayers. My final problem, as written, these provisions appear to allow unelected Calvert personnel to waive some, if not most, remediation costs from builders to Calvert taxpayers without any accountability to Calvert commissioners or residents. In view of the above objections, I request that you commissioners return the proposed APF provisions to county staff and direct that the APF be revised to, number one, clearly label key stakeholders. Number two, use more accurate language. Number three, set clear and recognizable benchmarks that are consistent with traditional APF and professional standards. Number four, clearly identify procedures and processes that can shift costs to taxpayers and provide Calvert commissioners and residents full accountability for costs shifted from builders to taxpayers. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Sue DeZurek, followed by Joseph Cormier.
Good evening. I'm Sue DeZurek. I'm from Huntingtown, and I'm speaking on behalf of Calvert Citizens United Grow Responsibly. We support the proposed addition to the APFO regarding the adequacy of fire, EMS response, 911 call volume, law enforcement, solid waste, and public water and sewer infrastructure. However, regarding sewer, we're concerned that some may push back on the proposed 80% capacity standard and seek a more lenient 90% threshold. It's important to note that 80% refers to annual average daily flow, and during high usage days, that 80% capacity can be temporarily exceeded. Calvert is experiencing increasingly frequent and severe major rainfall events due to climate change. We're already seeing problems with managing stormwater runoff into sewers that then overflow into environmentally sensitive creeks and wetlands. 80% is far more responsible threshold than 90% to reduce the possibility of damaging sewer overflows. Please keep the 80% sewer capacity standard. On roads and intersections, KCC has three big concerns with the new APF language. The first is that if the proposed new development causes roads or intersections levels to service to fail, or a failing level of service to get even worse, the development could still move forward after a 6-year waiting period, even if road and intersection mitigation haven't been made. Under the current APFO, that isn't allowed. The developments simply cannot move forward at all unless the roads and intersections are fixed. For other infrastructures like schools, 6-year waiting periods make sense because it gives the county enough time to build adequate new capacities. But roads and intersections are different. In most cases, expanding the number of lanes and size of intersection is required. Geographic constraints may require the seizure of taxpayer and commercially owned private property under eminent domain, or impinge on environmentally sensitive areas. Both result in legal risk. Then there's the huge cost. State funding assistance for expanding roads and intersections is far more difficult to get than new school funding. Commissioners would be forced to pass the cost of road and intersection mitigation to county taxpayers, or more likely be forced by budget constraints to leave the increased traffic backups unmitigated, and citizens are left once again sitting in traffic. Please vote to keep the current APF language that makes the waiting period indefinite until road and intersection problems are fixed. Second, please expand the geographic area for new development traffic impact studies out to the first arterial roadway, Route 2, 4, or 231, depending on the development location. Right now, the study area only needs to include the closest intersection. In some cases, this limits traffic studies to lightly traveled secondary roads, when the real impact is the potential traffic congregation on Route 2, 4, and 231. Third, the trip generation factors used in traffic studies in Calvert are based on nationwide averages and not local conditions. National averages make assumptions about the percentage of single-income households, the availability of mass transit, ride-sharing, bicycle and pedestrian routes that do not apply to Calvert's car-centric commuting situations. Using national average trip generation factors results serious underestimates of how new developments impact Calvert traffic congestion. The 276 units proposed for the Lusby apartments will most likely add more than the estimated 138 vehicles to morning rush. This is why the Maryland Department of Planning Best Practices and the National Institute of Traffic Engineers recommends using trip generation factors from similar nearby developments rather than nationwide average. Our new APF should do the same. In conclusion, 1, keep the proposed 80% sewer capacity threshold. 2, keep the current APFO requirements that road mitigation must be completed before construction of new development. 3, expand the traffic impact studies. And 4, mandate use of locally determined trip generation factors instead of nationwide averages. Thank you for your time, and I hope you will take careful consideration to our requests.
Thank you.
Joseph Cormier, followed by Myra Gowans.
Good evening again, Commissioners. My name is Joseph Cormier from Owings, Maryland. It's unfortunate that someone from the Sheriff's Office couldn't be with her this evening. I was concerned at their presentation this morning where they said that their total count that pushed them over the 1.5 APF included their jailhouse deputies, and I just don't think that that is an effective strata to use, because we want to know if we can get an EMS unit somewhere within 10 minutes. We want to know if someone picks up 911 in 10 seconds or less. I want to know that a sheriff's office is available to be somewhere within 10 minutes, not getting someone from the jail or the detention center or an SRO to attend to a situation. So it's unfortunate they weren't able to be here to clarify that this evening. It's unfortunate no one from the Board of Education, Superintendent's Office, was available at either presentation this morning or this evening. I don't understand how they weren't involved in this discussion this evening. Everything we do doesn't happen in a vacuum, it's a ripple. So if we can say the schools aren't at 100% today, that's great, but I want to know where we're at, and I want to know what their projections are. And when we add more housing in, how that's going to affect our roads and how it's going to affect our sewer, we're going to have to add another school building. So I feel like, as we have 2 new Board of Ed members, one here this evening, Ms. Grennis, and 3 new commissioners, I hope that the relationship between the Board of Education and the county commissioners gets that reset button it so desperately needs. So again, this APF, I think it needs more work. I know that some of you might be in legacy building mode because your time is short. Please don't feel like you got to rush this. The train will stay on the tracks and keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Myra Gowans.
I'm Myra Gowans. I'm the founder of Calvert Citizens United, but I'm speaking for myself tonight in a summation. In the matter discussed here this evening, let me illuminate some of the people attending and our new commissioners to 2 egregious caveats. Caveat number 1, Calvert citizens were introduced to Mary Beth Cook and Mark Willis on July 23rd, 2019, at the last hearing prior to adoption of the 20-year comp plan. Local builder developers, sitting as a small business interest group, identified these 2 as part of the backroom coalition by and between county builders and local government. Since that statement, Calvert Citizens United have been involved in litigation which has worked its way to the Maryland Supreme Court, the first time Calvert County has been in the Maryland Supreme Court. Caveat number 2, at the adoption of the comp plan on 8/5/2019, Mark Willis stated to the BOCC the comp plan would be revisited every 2 years to make certain development was on track in order to make changes as needed. Commissioner Hance questioned Mark Willis at length. State Planning Secretary McCord advised CCU that per state law, the plan is only revisited at the 10-year mark. This statement that was made then and the actions that have followed need to be repealed. Okay. Now we are back to questioning the integrity of the BOCC in placing a single unelected official with such questionable ties and leverage, as well as unmitigated power and authority, overseeing the ultimate approval of entire mitigation process on behalf of our local builder developer coalition. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Any other?
That's all that signed up.
Do we have anybody on Zoom?
There are 2 folks on Zoom who I will ask to use the raise your hand function under the More button if you wish to provide comment. Neither have.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any further discussion, or I can entertain a motion?
Well, there's no discussion, that's for sure.
Motion to close the record. And move this to the county commissioners, finding it consistent with the comp plan.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Freeland. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Tui. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye. Opposed.
Two opposed. Motion carries. Commissioner Hans?
Thank you. So, gentlemen, you've heard the presentation and the recommendation from the planning commission. Are there any questions or discussion?
I do want to clarify a few things. So I could speak for my 20%. The intent for me is, and I think I've heard many times over, extreme concern for growth with our resources, infrastructure. So I just want to make sure I'm clear, as we've had many discussions with this, that how to hit this in a broad stroke. But basically, this APFO is designed to address those needs and concerns, that the traffic studies were adequated. Are you comfortable in maybe explaining how we approach traffic now for this study?
So that's not my wheelhouse. That would be Public Works. But as Carrie presented this morning, they are making changes on how they do the analysis. Whereas today the number 400 trips is used, they're moving that down to, I believe he said, 250. So we're making a lot of strides, making things more restrictive, so that more analysis has to be done during the development review process.
Right. And Mary Beth, there are APFs for currently, there are APFs for 2 items and 2 items only, correct?
That's correct.
And
Roads
what are
and
those
schools.
2 items?
Roads and schools.
Roads and schools. We are making, under the schools, we are making it the same or more restrictive.
No
under the
change.
schools. No change, that's what I thought. Under the roads, we are making it more restrictive than it currently is, correct?
That's correct.
We are going to a C level throughout the county.
Plus the analysis is going to kick
Right.
in quicker.
So, and again, because this came up before, if a development currently, without these changes going in, if a development is going to be built off of, I'll pick a road, H.D. Truman in Lusby, currently, there's no consideration to that affecting 231 and Route 4 or the intersections at West Ward and Route 4 in Dunkirk, correct?
That's correct.
With this going in, those will be considered, correct? It's an overall?
That I can't say for certain.
Okay.
There again is under the Public Works.
But it's my understanding that the type C throughout the county would have to ensure. That was my understanding of it.
You're correct.
There was quite a few questions in reference to the 6 years, and I know it took me a little while to understand that, and I had to have the attorney explain that. Is it suitable for the attorney to explain that, why that 6 years in there?
Sure. So under the United States Constitution, government can take no property without just compensation. The Supreme Court cases have educated us that 6 to 7 years is the outside point at which you can use land use regulation to deprive someone of all economic benefits of their property without having to pay just compensation. So that's why there is a point in time at which they will be allowed to go forward, or they can mitigate. And I understand the comment about remediation versus mitigation, but the provisions of this draft ordinance require that they meet the standard. It's not a negotiation. It is that they meet the standard through paying out of pocket.
Understood. And the way I look at this personally, and at this point it's 25%, not 20, that this is just one more tool in the toolbox to help keep Calvert rural. That's in the big picture, that's how I'm looking at it. It's just one more tool in the toolbox. We've implemented other tools over the last year, and this is just one more of those.
Because a lot of the comments are exactly right. 278 units is 500 cars. Everybody has 2 cars. I mean, some places have 3 or 4, and it's not it's not getting it from A to B, but it's getting it all the way through the process. And even like we discussed today, and I'll bring up something that maybe you folks haven't heard. You know, early in my career at this, people would approach me with things that were not under our jurisdiction. And as learning, I would say, you know, well, okay, that's a state or a federal thing. And I had a very close friend of mine said, no, you don't understand. You're my elected official. I'm bringing it to you. Now, if that's state or federal government, but that's your problem. But I'm telling you, and that's on to you. And it took me a minute to let that process, and they're right, you know. And this is where that starts. So my focal point is on this is, okay, it's great under the old rules that the car could get out of its apartment building or residential area, but when it hits that state road, what's the effect? Because we all feel that. So I want to make sure that when we're doing this document that we're addressing that, because the only way out of here is on a state road. So if the caveat is, well, once I get to a state road, I'm good. No, because we all have to use those roads. So I want to make sure in this document that we're addressing that. And I'm assuming that C does that. Am I saying that properly?
Yes, and it's making it more restrictive than it is today.
Now, if a project cannot meet the C, it's dead in the water for the 6 years. At the end of the 6 years, the state of Maryland's going to say, you are required to bring it up to there. Now, I have proposed several times that every business is responsible for its footprint. So at that point, there will be a cost involved. But we don't have, and please stop me at any time if I'm saying this wrong, because it gets very complicated. We don't have an exact fee schedule. Is that correct? Or am I wrong?
For road improvements, we cannot anticipate the different scenarios that what it would take to get to a level of service C within the study area.
Would this document address whose responsibility that is? I don't want there to be any misconceptions that the taxpayer would be paying for a project.
Insofar as they wish to not wait the 6 years, it would be the business, whether it's a residential development business or a commercial business, it would be their responsibility to incur those costs and get the permits to do the work or pay into a fund to get the work done. If they wish to wait the 6 years, they'd still have to get the state highway permit if they're going to impact a state road, but they would not incur those costs.
See, and that's a problem. That's a problem, because some people can wait. And, you know, this is, I'm talking generational, and I've said this many times publicly, probably in the 90s when we were building a school every year, if we'd had a crystal ball to see that impact, would have probably addressed it differently. So I just want to make sure going forward, because this is an antiquated document, it needs to be addressed. That's why we're here today, there's no doubt about that. But I don't want the loophole to be, well, 6 years from now I can just do what I want, and hey, you guys signed it off that way. I don't want that. I mean, people spoke very clear to me, the people that supported me. They're like, Mike, we want this stopped. They were very clear. You know, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't want our quality of life ruined. I look at Calvert County as an island. Basically, you look all around us, and they got no problem building on every square inch out there. I mean, they really do. And when they build it all up, they just look for the next place. And, you know, I've had some say to me to my face, hey, I don't care, I want my money. But I do care because I'm going to die here, and so I just want to make sure as we do this document that we're thinking generational.
With a couple of people mentioned about changing the APF in reference to the sewer, there is no adequate public facility requirements right now for sewer, for water, for law enforcement, for 911, for any of those. This is, in my opinion, a something is better than nothing. Right now, other than the roads, which they have to be at an E or an F, and other than the schools, which right now is kind of a non-issue on the schools discussion, all the others are new. All of this other stuff is something a hurdle or something that has to be addressed by someone wanting to come in. Right now, as it is, if they come in and they say they want to build this, absolutely none of the stuff we just discussed applies. It's never up for discussion. There is no 6-year waiting period. They could do it tomorrow, as long as they met the other zoning requirements. That's why I'm for these APFs as presented, because something is better than nothing. And once they're in, the future commissioners or future people, the future leaders can build upon this base that we're looking to try and establish today.
I'd like to make a motion.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, sir.
So Director Dahl, these percentages related to sewer, are they consistent with MDE requirements?
Okay, consistent house, or I'm trying to follow you.
MDE has requirements of what we are required to do once we get to certain capacity levels.
Correct.
Are these percentages consistent with MDE requirements for?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Just want to address
To
that.
my knowledge, yes, they are.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Director Cook, if we adopt these proposed changes tonight, when will they go into effect?
Upon recordation, not sooner than 10 days.
And there's generally a grandfathering?
There is. So anything that is currently submitted would be grandfathered and have to get concept approval within 1 year.
Because I believe, if memory serves me right, in the recent past, we've used concept approval as a grandfathering level. Is there a reason why we wouldn't do that in this instance?
I believe I used the exact same language that we used on the last text amendment, which was anything
concept?
in the pipeline has to reach concept before they have 1 year to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be concept for, we just wrote concept, yes.
Don't make me start asking those questions again.
I'm trying not to.
So I understand that something has to get put into place. The document in place now is so antiquated, it's not funny. And it's got a lot of holes. Can this document be modified in the future where nobody's saying, well, hey, on November 29th, I was covered then, and what you did now, I'm grandfathered then. I mean, can this document be modified just because, hey, granted those standards were in place on the 29th, but these standards are in place now, and there is no grandfathering from the 29th? Because you've seen that game too, and I want to make sure we prohibit that.
So by law in the state of Maryland, as applied by the courts, you are vested when you have a valid permit and have constructed something that has come out of the ground. These provisions are more generous, and I can read them to the board if you like. It does require that any development application for site plan, subdivision, road plan, or permit, because this does also apply to building permits that don't need to go through site plan or subdivision, will be grandfathered under the prior regulations and will remain vested for 12 months from the effective date of this ordinance, and those grandfathered by that shall mature to concept site plan or preliminary subdivision or road plan approval or permit issuance within 12-month period. And those projects that have concept site plan or preliminary subdivision approval upon the effective date of this ordinance will be grandfathered under the prior regulations so long as their development approvals remain valid, not expired, pursuant to the applicable provisions of the zoning ordinance.
So if a fee structure was put into place that addressed the 6-year window, but it was put in at a later date, could that apply back to this document today?
So long as no one has gotten a permit and constructed something with that permit that came out of the ground, the Board of County Commissioners could make that change effective retroactively. Yes.
So I guess the point is, we don't want a line in your office tomorrow morning.
No.
And we've seen that happen in the past, which I thought previously we'd used concept approval and not given them a year to get there.
So the application would have had to have already been submitted. So then they're just going through the process for that year.
So they can't come in tomorrow and put in an application, even though this can't be enacted for 10 days.
That's correct. I mean, they would already have to be under design and close to ready to submit today.
Okay. I have no other questions.
Mr. President, I'm sorry. I move that we close the record and approve and adopt the ordinance enacting the recommended changes to the Calvert County zoning ordinance and adopting and enacting Chapter 3 of the Calvert County Code with the following changes. Number 1, at Section 3-6, require that each lane and lane approach for roadways in the impact area must operate at or above the minimum level of service of C using the highway capacity method. And 2, at Section 3-14A1 and 3-15A, change 80% to 90%.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. I'm not going to repeat the motion. You gentlemen just heard it. Any discussion on that motion?
Yes, sir, Mr. President, one more thing. I would caution, do not use this as a springboard to go to planning and zoning tomorrow and stand in line and try to play that game. I would caution responsibility and respect, because it will be met with as much opposition as I can physically bring to it. The intent here is to create a quality of life and maintain a quality in life for all the residents here, not to abuse the system or try to find some legal wiggle round. So sometimes, the best intent, people take it and say, okay, well, what else can I try to do? Please hear those words and caution that statement. I'm going to go along with it today, but you will have a long road if you try to manipulate this system. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, last item for us is adjournment.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
What do you,
Gentlemen, I need a motion.
Motion
to approve, adjourn?
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all.